Over the weekend, President Donald Trump nominated Judge Amy Coney Barrett of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals to replace Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who passed away a couple of Fridays ago. And now, of course, the Republicans are working hard to approve this nomination to confirm her through the United States Senate, ideally by Election Day. What are we to make of Judge Barrett and her record and what she could bring to the Supreme Court, and also the judicial nominating process as it has developed over time and as we've come to know it for the past 30 or 40 years especially? Let's talk about these topics here on Jimmy at the Crossroads with Ilya Shapiro, who is director of the Center for Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute and author of a brand new book. Let's put it up on the screen, Mr. Matoush. Supreme Disorder, Judicial Nominations, and the Politics of America's Highest Court. Its author, Ilya Shapiro, rejoins us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Ilya, sir, welcome back.
Good to be back with you, Jimmy.
One aspect that I think has really helped to make the Supreme Court nominating process and any federal judicial post very significant, and that comes to the role of the judiciary and how it's evolved over time. I mean, I wrote this, and it echoes some of the sentiments I know you have in your new book, Supreme Disorder, and what others have observed. But in a column I wrote last week, I said that the big problem for Democrats is not that Trump is president and can fill a vacancy. Democrats have grown government so much and relied on the courts for so long that they are fearful. Win or lose in November, a constitutionalist court is a lasting impediment to their long-running expansion of power. That's why if Democrats were in Republicans' position, they would certainly move apace. And I think this is significant because since the Supreme Court has become so involved in political matters and helping to even at times allow for the growth of government to continue unabated, I would say in many cases in violation of the Constitution, that has upped the ante, made it so much more important for the Supreme Court when these political positions or these nomination opportunities come up for a president.
Yeah, I think you were paraphrasing a part of my chapter 19, Jimmy. So those were some good thoughts there. You're right. Part of the reason why these battles exist is because the power has been contra constitutional requirements been centralized in Washington, and within Washington, rather than Congress even resolving these debates, these political clashes or differences in cultural views, what have you, it's shifted into the administrative state, into the executive branch. We have governance even before the pen and the phone and the tweet. We had the regulation, and there's many more regulations than there are laws, and the bureaucrats can't be unelected; they can only be sued. So these different interpretive theories really matter, and that's why you have these sorts of fights. But you're absolutely right. The reason why people in other countries can't really name their justices the way that we do here is because what their courts decide aren't necessarily the biggest political issues. They're more technical legal ones.
Once again, we're talking with Ilya Shapiro, author of the new book, Supreme Disorder, Judicial Nominations, and the Politics of America's Highest Court, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Before we get to Judge Amy Coney Barrett's nomination and some of the different aspects of her judicial history and what we can expect in this process, I want to ask you about the life and legacy of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late justice, particularly the legacy on the court and what she brought to the bench since being appointed in 1993 by then President Bill Clinton.
Well, she was, as many people have called her, she was, even before joining the court, the Thurgood Marshall of the women's movement. That is, achieving and pushing back on so many of the sex stereotypes and gender discriminatory parts of society that had become codified in law. And often being very strategic, having men as clients, challenging some of these things. And so even before she became a judge, she was already a well-known heroine and pioneer, and became even more so on the court but became kind of a reliable vote, a reliable voice on the progressive side of the court on issues of not just gender, but race and religion, government power, seeing the federal government as a force for justice in the world. Her probably most famous majority opinion is Virginia versus United States, requiring the Virginia State School Military Institute to admit female cadets. Although in the last 10 or so years, especially after Justice Stevens retired and she became the liberal leader, she's been issuing these fierce dissents, and that's where she became the notorious RBG and kind of this pop figure on the left, where little girls would dress up as her for Halloween, that sort of thing. That's really come in the last 10 years in cases over voting rights and campaign finance, employment discrimination, the travel ban, you name it. Those biggest controversies, whether on the bottom side of a 5-4 or a 7-2, she was there.
Yeah, it really is striking when you consider what she brought to the table when she was nominated, and then also in terms of eventually becoming that liberal leader.
Jimmy, it's one of the ironies of history that when President Clinton was nominating her, a lot of progressive activist groups, especially involved in the abortion debate, were nervous because 6 months earlier she had given a speech saying that the court really overreached in Roe v. Wade and had done it the wrong way at the wrong time. Now, as we know now, that seems kind of ridiculous and amazing that they had that concern, but she was making a very good lawyer's point that the Supreme Court inserted itself into a political controversy, made things worse, and didn't use the right legal tools. She would have used equal protection and women rather than the right to privacy, that sort of thing. But interesting little wrinkle in history.
Now let's shift gears here to focus in on Judge Amy Coney Barrett, the nominee. What do we know about her from a background standpoint, Ilya Shapiro?
She's got a long track record of thoughtful and serious academic writings, as well. She's spent 20 years as a professor at Notre Dame Law School, as well as 3 years on the bench in the Seventh Circuit, which, by the way, is more time than John Roberts spent on the circuit court. Only 1 year less than Scalia. A lot of the judges who get promoted from the lower courts don't spend that much time along the way. And she's famous for a dissent that she wrote in a Second Amendment case, very historical, looking at felon deprivation of the right, nonviolent felon deprivation of the right to keep and bear arms, in a couple of abortion cases, looking at what Roe v. Wade requires or Planned Parenthood versus Casey requires. But in general, very much like Scalia, the justice for whom she clerked, sticks to history and tradition rather than making up the law as she goes along. Maybe a little more willing to overturn precedents on the question of stare decisis, maybe more in between Scalia and Thomas, but can be expected to be on the right side of the court. Where exactly we'd have to see, but has been a thoughtful scholar, and her dedication to textualism, originalism comes through. Maybe a little too much beholden to the rational basis test to get into the weeds in terms of not questioning the reasons for certain kinds of economic regulations. But some of this will just have to be fleshed out in the cases that come before her. I think she'll, in the end, be somewhere, right there where Scalia would have been.
Again, Ilya Shapiro, our guest, author of the new book. Let's put it up on the screen again, Mr. Matus, Supreme Disorder, Judicial Nominations and the Politics of America's Highest Court. Now let's get into some of the philosophy a little more from the perspective of Judge Amy Coney Barrett. Here is President Trump in cut 3 when he officially nominated Judge Barrett. Here's what he said in terms of her judicial philosophy, that is how she would look at interpreting the law.
Amy Coney Barrett will decide cases based on the text of the Constitution as written. As Amy has said, being a judge takes courage. You are not there to decide cases as you may prefer. You are there to do your duty and to follow the law wherever it may take you. That is exactly what Judge Barrett will do on the U.S. Supreme Court. Law and order is the foundation of the American system of justice. No matter the issue, no matter the case before her, I am supremely confident that Judge Barrett will issue rulings based solely upon a fair reading of the law. She will defend the sacred principle of equal justice for citizens of every race, color, religion, and creed. Congratulations again to Judge Barrett. I know that you will make our country very, very proud.
And one other clip I want to show before we dive in here, Ilya Shapiro, is of Amy Coney Barrett in Cut 5 talking about, well, comparing herself to the judicial philosophy of the late Justice Antonin Scalia, for whom she was once a clerk.
I was lucky enough to clerk for Justice Scalia, and given his incalculable influence on my life, I am very moved to have members of the Scalia family here today, including his dear wife, Maureen. I clerked for Justice Scalia more than 20 years ago, but the lessons I learned still resonate. His judicial philosophy is mine too. A judge must apply the law as written. Judges are not policymakers, and they must be resolute in setting aside any policy views they might hold.
Your reactions, Ilya Shapiro?
Yeah, this is why I said that she's going to be very much like Justice Scalia. Bit of an updating 20 years later in terms of, there's been a lot of academic scholarship on how to determine the original public meaning and how to be a faithful judge and what the text means and how you apply different canons of construction and things like that. But I think she's going to be Scalia, although maybe without the sharp elbows. I mean, you saw the grace, the poise there. She could very well be not just an intellectual leader, but to be able to persuade some of her colleagues with the force of her character.